Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Taylor and I'm really excited about today's video because I've finally gotten the big block Chevy back from the machine shop for the 1970 El Camino project. So let's check this car out real quick and I'll fill you in on what we're doing here. So if you guys are new to the channel, this is my 1970 Chevy El Camino. This was actually my first car. I picked it up with my dad just a few weeks before my 13th birthday, and I worked on it until I could drive when I was 16 years old. When I was 17, I decided I wanted to build a big block Chevy for it, and a few months ago, that was the rendition of this big block that we just pulled out of here. But we'll go underneath the car real quick. I'll show you everything I've done so far, and then I'll get into the engine. Now, as you can tell, there is no engine or transmission in this car, but we will be installing those later this week. But I've got pretty much everything cleaned up. I took this car out and pressure washed it a few months ago just to get all the grime and dust off. So I'm gonna be repainting the cross member, the lower frame tubes here, sway bar, and just really doing some touch-up stuff since the last time I put an engine in here, which was over 6 years ago. But as you can see, it's a pretty straight car. Everything's real nice and solid. Then if we kind of under here, you can see it's a nice rust-free car. You know, not a rotisserie restoration or anything, but this thing's gonna be looking really nice under here with that brand new rebuilt engine and the new 4L80E trans that we're putting in here. So here's the engine. I have been detailing this over the past few days on and off, repainted the entire block. This is a brand new Moroso oil pan that I put on here. It has an internal windage tray, trap door, and crank scraper. It's a 7-quart capacity with kickouts on the side of the sump here, so that'll be a really good pan for what we're doing with this car. I put fresh freeze plugs in it throughout, as well as oil galley plugs, and it's looking super clean under here. I put the front cover on, the camshaft's already installed, and I put a cam button on there since this is a retrofit roller cam, as this is a Mark IV 454, so it didn't come factory with the roller cam. But I'll flip this thing over now and tell you guys what has been taking so long with this engine. Now, in the last video update I did on this car just a couple of months ago, I had mentioned that I threw my new cylinder heads on and I had the camshaft installed to check the piston to valve clearance. And as it turned out, the camshaft has such a large duration compared to the previous camshaft that the valves were actually hitting the pistons. So I took the engine all apart, I brought it to the machine shop, and I wanted to have the pistons fly cut. And basically, the pistons are removed from the engine, they're removed from the connecting rods, and then they machine out a larger valve relief in them so that your valves do not hit the pistons, which is something that you can just never have because it'll just lead to a catastrophic failure. But anyways, the engine was there for about 2 weeks before they even got to doing anything to it. And within that time, I decided, you know what? I want to put new pistons in here because we'll just get some with larger valve reliefs, and instead of investing a bunch of money on an hourly basis with the machine shop to fly cut those pistons, I figured buying a new set would be the best alternative, and we can also bump compression ratio at the same time with some larger piston domes. So as you can see here, this thing is looking shiny and brand new. We've got some really nice Icon premium forged pistons in this thing with 27cc domes. And these domes are about twice the size of my previous pistons. So the compression ratio, all things considered with the combustion chamber volume, compressed head gasket thickness, and everything will be right at 10.5 to 1, which is very optimal for a street pump gas engine with aluminum heads. Couple of setbacks that I had, one of them being obviously ordering the new pistons, but when I ordered them from Summit Racing, it claimed they'd ship out the following day from the manufacturer. As it turned out, they were back ordered about 6 weeks in the 40 thousandths overbore that I needed, since this block was 40 over previously. However, I could get the 60 over pistons much quicker, so I decided to order those. It cost me a couple extra $100 to have the whole engine bored out again, so this is now a 468 big block. It's a 60 thousandths overbore. So this thing is really gonna run nice. It's got a nice zero deck on it, and essentially we're ready to install these cylinder heads. Now the funny thing about all of this is that even though it was quite a while ago that I built this engine, I built it in the fall of 2012. This engine probably only had 7,000 to 10,000 miles on it, and I wasn't planning to completely rebuild it while it was out, but everything is brand new. We got new bearings, we got new rings, everything, pistons, new overbore, so it's brand new all over again. And we're gonna get ready now to install the cylinder heads. But I'll show you something else that I did kind of impulsively with these heads while they were at the machine shop. Check these bad boys out. They did some nice bowl work or combustion chamber work here. This is a 225 intake valve and a 188 exhaust valve in these. It's really going to breathe well with the camshaft that I picked. And hopefully you can see in here, they did some really nice port and polish work to these. You can see very smooth all the way throughout into the intake side there. We'll run around to the exhaust ports. You can see it's all pretty nicely done. So I think this thing should run incredibly well, and I'm looking forward to getting these things installed. So with all that said and all these new parts, let's go ahead and cut to a time lapse and get this whole top end bolted together. Well guys, as you can probably tell, it is a different day now. The GoPro ended up dying on me while I was getting some of that work done when I was gonna edit together this big time lapse, and obviously didn't catch half of what happened. But anyways, here's the engine now. We have the rocker arms all installed with the push rods and the lifters. Everything is lashed, and I set the lash. We went 0 lash, and then I did 3/4 of a turn of preload, and then locked out the old poly locks there. So right now I'm gonna dump 5 quarts of oil in here. I'm gonna break the engine in with 1040. You know, I am gonna plan to run this with 2050, but I figure for the initial startup, I'll do a lighter oil, do that 1040, and really coat all the lifters and the cam, and then it'll all kind of soak and settle down into the pan. Now that is a 7-quart pan that's down there, so once I get it in the car, I'll check it once the dipstick's in line, and we'll get just the right amount in there. So now let's go ahead, dump this oil in, get the intake manifold set on with the gaskets, and then we'll even get out the valve covers as well. I almost forgot, got to install the oil filter real quick underneath so we don't have a big leak after we dump this 5 quarts in. All right, here goes nothing. Just want to get it up here by these lifters. Then I'll dump the rest kind of down in to the cam here. So now I'm going to take a little acetone on a paper towel, clean up our gasket surface here on the head where our intake manifold gasket's going to go. I'll go ahead and clean up the block on the front and the back there where it all meets, and then we'll dress this all with a light bead of RTV silicone where the water jacket comes in, and get our intake manifold set on. All right, I'm gonna do a little bit of this ultra black right where the heads meet the block right here. Fill that up and then do a light bead across. Go ahead and put these gaskets on, and then I'll hit these again right where the gaskets meet them. And then I'll hit a little bit of these water jackets here where they come into the manifold, and really make sure that gets a nice seal as well. All right, I'm gonna set our first one down. There's these little nubs on the back that push into the block, so you can line it up perfectly. Get the rear one set. Cool. Now that those are sitting in there, we can grab our actual intake gaskets and set those in. All right, those are sitting right where they need to be. So I'm gonna grab this manifold and lower it down on there. I threw a little bit more RTV on this stuff just to really make sure it seals nicely. Go ahead and set this thing down and hopefully get it lined up right the first time. And we are looking pretty good. So I've got to clean up my hardware to bolt these in, and then I'll catch up with you after I've snugged all this down. All right, guys, this thing is just looking fast now. I went ahead and threw the carburetor on here just so we can get a look at it, and this thing sits pretty tall. So a couple more parts that I bought for this that I haven't talked about yet are the carburetor and the intake manifold. This right here is an Edelbrock Performer RPM air gap intake. It's a dual plane intake manifold, and they call it an air gap because you can see right through the bottom of it. The runners have space between the valley cover. That kind of helps cooling with nice open air under there. So this is a manifold I actually picked up secondhand, although it was brand new in the box. I actually had this in my cart on Summit, ready to order a bunch of things when I found one on Craigslist. So I picked this up new in the box for 220 bucks. And saved about $110 over getting it new from Summit. The next thing I got here is a Holley 950 HP double pumper carburetor. The old carburetor that was on this was a 750 double pumper, and it would have been good for street use, but at max RPM of about 6,500 that this engine will have, this carburetor is going to help us with the volumetric efficiency at that RPM. It does not have a choke, and as you can see, it has some pretty big bores here, so that is going to flow a lot of CFM. So this is really the right combination for the camshaft, the intake manifold, you know, kind of a lot of different things come into play here. So this is really going to work well. Now I did decide to go with a dual plane manifold because this car will primarily be driven on the street, although I will go to the track with it quite often, I have a feeling. But with the camshaft that I chose, that Lunati hydraulic roller, it has a large duration of 242, 252 at 50 thousandths tappet lift. It's got split lift and duration for the intake and exhaust, and a 598 intake lift and 612 exhaust lift, and that is going to definitely sacrifice a little lower RPM torque. So I wanted to make up with it with this dual plane manifold. Edelbrock claims that this thing works well in the range of about 2,000 to 6,500 RPM or so, or might be 25 to 65, which is kind of right in the operating range of that camshaft. So this will help us with torque a little bit down low, but it should have the oomph to get us up to that 6,500 red line. So as you guys can tell, we do have a couple more things to button up. I've got to put my fuel pump block-off plate and gasket on here. I'm running an electric fuel pump in the car, so I've got to throw that on with a little RTV. I've got the harmonic balancer over here, which I just painted. So I'm going to throw that on along with the lower crank pulley. And I've got to repaint my water pump too. I'm doing a factory style GM water pump on this, so a couple more things to prep up, but for the most part, this thing is really well sorted out. We'll throw the engine mounts on when I get closer to putting it in the car, but it is looking really cool right now. It's definitely satisfying to see this thing come together like this. So one of the beautiful things about having an El Camino is that it has a bed in the back, and over the past 2 or 3 months that this thing has been torn apart, I've been using it as storage for some of these parts, so I've got to lower the car down so that we can get to the valve covers. Now don't worry, I'm not going to crush this stuff. I've just got to get it low enough so that I can reach into the bed, but it's kind of nice having this in the garage, definitely practical. I'm going to step up here over all of this junk, see what we've got back here. It's been a couple months since I've looked in here. But anyways, we've got a couple of miscellaneous items here. I guess I'll grab the alternator and the bracket out while I'm up here, but I need to grab these valve covers along with these valve cover spacers. Those are not roller rocker clearanced valve covers, so when I put this engine together the first time around, I had to get some little die cast spacers for those roller rockers, so I've got a couple sets of gaskets and things like that to put on. And I may change these some days, but for right now, I'm gonna just run them, clean them up, and throw them on there. So let's grab this stuff out and a couple of these other miscellaneous boxes and get back to work. So I just threw a couple parts on just so you can see what it's gonna look like when it's all put together. None of it's fastened down, but as you can see, these valve covers are actually pretty good looking. Those spacers will have to be stripped. This was an iron-headed engine before, and I painted the heads and the spacers to match. So I'm gonna paint strip those, and hopefully they'll kind of have the same look as the heads. And then this is an air cleaner I've got. This is a Spectre insert. It's one of those steel mesh ones. And truthfully, now that I'm looking at this manifold and the carburetor, I think I might have a hood clearance issue, but we'll see. Hopefully the cowl hood, where is it? Hopefully that cowl hood has a big enough cutout to allow that to go up in there when the hood's shut. But we're looking pretty cool. So there's a couple more things to button up. I've got to paint the water pump, put the balancer on, a couple odds and ends, do a temp sender, oil pressure, and then this thing will be completed, and that will kind of conclude the engine build of this project. And then of course we'll move on to fitting the transmission once this is installed, and measuring up for the drive shaft, installing the standalone computer for that transmission, but this is going to be a really awesome package, I'm thinking. Well guys, that's going to do it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed this update on the 1970 El Camino project, and I'm really excited to get this engine thrown into the car. And truthfully, I think after I do a little bit of off-camera work, the next video that you'll be seeing is of this engine going in that car. So stay tuned for that. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up for me and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more automotive content like you saw here today. This project is going to start coming along really quickly, and I'm hoping to have it on the road within the next week and a half to 2. So this is going to be a lot of fun really quickly here. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next video.